I'm hoping to get across 40 years of work and passion with pictures telling 1,000 words, and hopefully I've actually got another 10,000 pictures and slides backing this. You can see here where Barrabool, the property is. In Western New South Wales, it's roughly 800 kilometres southwest of Sydney, close to the centre of the universe there. The important thing is, from my perspective, you'll notice that it is actually 800 k's both ways. Because I always say to people in Sydney, we're invited to Sydney and come the other way. It's the same distance. Come and visit us. The property's about 5,000 hectares roughly, and been in the family for a long time. The process I think that I've been through at Barrabool is very similar to the learning process I think that we collectively have all been through, and the CIRA standards process. And this is the front gate at the property, and it's probably my greatest embarrassment is down the front drive of the property is a long line of very inappropriate plantings done when I was a teenager, on the best advice of forestry extension officers at the time, all Western Australian species, because that was the only seed that was available, and they were looking for things that would grow on treeless plains. And I think this is a great photo because it shows, one, what a disaster they were. Most of them are dying or falling over now. And there is all this natural regeneration of boree, weeping mile, in the foreground, and massive regeneration of an area that was fenced 20 years after behind it. So it really highlights the stupidity of not having, there was no reference area, no idea what I was doing. That plantation of trees was going to do everything, include solve child poverty, and but it obviously never was, and just found it in no reference at all. So as pointed out by Jill, the reference sites and having reference areas and references in terms of, there's a lot of accumulated knowledge in those, apart from the beautiful, insightful drawings, as Jill pointed out, but there's a lot of knowledge gone into these, accumulated into these profiles, collective knowledge from a whole range of people, from research, from experience, from knowledge of specific sites around the region. And I've been blessed in my working career to see lots of properties, see a lot of areas and accumulate all that stuff together so that you start to picture, I can see what this was. We've got maps and old historical data, diary records, all these things. So that's all gone into this, and that has helped me build on and incorporate into this notion of what you're starting to target, what you're trying to build, what you're trying to create. As said, without a plan and without those reference areas and without the knowledge of the property and having a long-term plan, and I've sort of started it and it's grown like topsy, but there has been a long-term vision. The property itself has probably up to 8 different vegetation communities, and as Davo pointed out, there is whole variations on those and arguments about what's what, but the property has about 8 different main vegetation communities, all of them either threatened or endangered, and not well managed and represented except in some areas. The property itself has been broken down into different soil types, different vegetation types, different sensitivities to grazing, and different production capabilities. So we've gone from, when I took over, probably 8 paddocks to almost 80 paddocks on the property, and lots of reticulated water and lots of relocation of water points and things like that. Because really the grazing exercise has been the cause of degradation, but it's also the tool of management. And you can't manage without demarcating and splitting up your country and having control over management. You can't do it without the fencing. Some of the areas are complete exclusion, stock exclusion, and my sort of museum sites. Some of them are working grazing sites, and some of them are intermittent grazing, but again with lots of different paddocks. It gives you the scope at any one time to keep stock on the move and long rest periods between grazing, and also, you know, at any one time I've probably got 30% of the place not being grazed. So here's some of the photographs, and obviously a lot of these photographs predate digital, so some of them come out a little wonky in the scanning. But this is a site, and I just mentioned to someone, I think it was Davo this morning, that this site in the top left is one of the first sites I was working with Jerilderie Landcare. We're talking about the idea of providing incentives to landowners to fence areas, and this was one of the first tests with Jerilderie Landcare to fence in a site, see what the response is, use it as a demonstration of what could be done, and then use that and the knowledge that's going to go through the Catchment Management Committee, it was at the time, and set up incentive programs for landowners. So that's one of the very first, it wasn't at the time a funded site, but it was really testing principles and ideas. So the bottom photo is the same spot about 5 years after stock exclusion, and then further down the track, that's probably 10 or 15 years later, but there is a lot of regen in the background which doesn't show up clearly, but it's an amazing site, a lot of diversity in it. There's no planting in that particular site, it's all the natural regeneration from seed that was there, or root suckering, and we'll go, this is examples. I had found over the years that in doing rabbit control with ripping with the tractor, that where you're disturbing some species, you would get root suckering from the disturbance. And there's about 13 species on the property that do respond to root suckering, and it really is an issue that a lot of these species are very long-lived, but seed production is also long periods between seed production. And my rationale in this is creating root suckers. You get more plants when you do get the seed production seasons, then the scope for regeneration is much faster or more advanced. So you see here the initial root suckers, that is the same spot, and that is the same spot now. And those stands are self-sustaining and producing seed. So there's a whole range of different veg communities. That's the same spot a few years apart. You can see in the background it was a treeless plain. For the last 80 years that site had been burnt in the 1918 fires. There'd been no adult acacias in that area prior to, or after the fires in 1918. I fenced off that paddock. It started to come back with boree, weeping mile, and that's an amazing regeneration there, plus a whole lot of other things that are coming as well. As you can see, this is another paddock, similar issue, the top left. Photo showing just the first emergence of acacias, a few years down the track, 4 or 5 years down the track, and that is the same photo point. It's become completely impermeable so I've actually moved the photo point further out, looking at the same direction, but that's the change that's occurred from basically a treeless landscape. So there has been direct seeding on the property, adding things that didn't come back from regeneration and or induced root suckering, and that has been really testing methods of direct seeding and things that have now been taken up at a broad scale, like Davo was talking about, and then supplementary planting of those species that don't regenerate freely or you couldn't justify using the seed because there's such small quantities of seed available. So that's another site there. Developing, and there's often surprises. This is in one of those first sites where there's native jasmine coming up, and I am absolutely certain it had to have been there. It's a native climber, jasmine and clematis on the site that were either there as chewed back living plants, or there was seed, but I can't imagine the seed would have lasted for the length of period that it's there for that species. And the interesting thing is, having those plants now, we're getting birds distributing those seeds around to other adjoining sites, so we're getting a working system. And that's really what it's about, self-sustaining systems. This area itself is another species, Eremophila longifolia, promoted root suckering, a lot more seed being produced, and now birds carting seed. I'm getting them 2 and 3 kilometres now away from other living plants regenerating. But the property is not just trees. There's a lot of areas of native grasslands, and there's probably at least 6 or 7 grassland sites. Yeah, the grasslands are really great, particularly in spring. And a year like this, it's going to be a fantastic spring with a lot of... I've got 1,000 photos to go. There's also lots of wetlands, and the wetlands are, as already noted, mostly not wet. Long periods between regeneration events and water. This is one of the years everything's filling up this year, and we're really managing some regeneration on some of those sites. So just in short, that it is complex, and it does take time. We've got woodlands without trees for long periods, grasslands that are mostly forbs for some of the time, wetlands that are dry most of the time, and long periods between effective management responses. That's greater than 25 years, a lot of the response times. And these episodic events, and the landscape's not static. But just because it's complex and just because it takes a long time is no excuse not to do it. And it is just the beginning. So thank you.